Hello everyone, and thanks for joining today's webinar, Collaboration Best Practices. My name is Anna and I'm a product marketing manager here at Smartsheet. Today we're going to focus on the different ways that you're going to be able to collaborate in Smartsheet. Most of the time, you're going to be collaborating by sharing your Smartsheet items directly. So inviting someone to make updates in a sheet, work in a report, or view your dashboard. There are, of course, additional needs that you may have when working in Smartsheet. So you may want to collect data from users without sharing your sheet, which can be done with a Smartsheet form. You may want to automate information, so notifying yourself or others anytime an important action is taken, or sending reminders based on the dates that are in your sheet. Or you might want to collaborate on content. So you're of course going to be working with a lot of stakeholders, different teams, or working across your organization, and being able to make sure that Smartsheet is your source of truth becomes really helpful in those scenarios. You can attach files directly to the relevant tasks that you're managing in Smartsheet, and you can even set up proofing approvals, so sharing content, reviewing it, making annotations, and tracking versions. Before we dive into these 4 different methods of collaboration, I do want to take a step back and kind of level set everyone by talking about user types as well as sharing permissions. So at Smartsheet, there are going to be 3 primary user types. Smartsheet admins are the ones who manage your Smartsheet account. So they assign licenses, they manage account settings, and for enterprise plans and above, they manage security controls like auto provisioning or single sign-on. When we're talking about collaboration, typically we're going to look at whether someone is a licensed user or a free user. And the big difference here is, as a licensed user, you can create Smartsheet items, you can own Smartsheet items, and a lot of what you're going to be doing in Smartsheet is going to reflect that ownership, as you might own a project, a process, or a program. One of the great things about Smartsheet is that you're going to be collaborating with a lot of people, but you don't necessarily need to give them a license. A free user or an unlicensed user can collaborate by viewing work, making changes in your sheet, so updating tasks or status, working in the attachments, reviewing proofs, and really a lot of these steps that they don't need to own a process and they don't need to have a license for. License types are important to understand because they reflect what you can do in Smartsheet at a higher level. And then when you're working in the individual Smartsheet items, you're going to look at permissions. Just like you would in a cloud storage program, for example, when you're sharing a sheet, a report, or workspace, you're going to select the type of permission. Mostly, and the most common one you're going to select is Editor Can Share, which means a collaborator can come into your sheet, they can make changes to the rows, the columns, and the cells, and they can even share that sheet with others with either editor or viewer permissions. You can, of course, have a viewer, which means they can't make any changes, but they can see all the information in the sheet, or an admin, and a licensed Smartsheet admin in a sheet can take many of the same actions that a sheet owner can. So they're able to actually impact how the sheet functions, adding or changing columns around, setting up sheet-wide processes like forms or automation. As a licensed Smartsheet user, you can start by creating a sheet from scratch, or you can use one of the many templates or template sets that we've made available for you. Click on the left panel and select the plus sign, and the template that we're using today is called Event Registration and Tracking. For those of you who are joining us live, to the right of your screen, you'll actually have a button to get started with this template. Anyone who's watching this recording can actually just search for it to create your own copy. This template set includes 2 sheets and a Smartsheet dashboard, and we're going to get started in the sheet called Event Registration and Summary with Form. When you start your work by downloading a template or a template set for your own use, the sheets, reports, and dashboards that you download are now your own. So you own these and you can continue to make updates, changing the structure, the functionality, editing forms, adding automation, and so on. What you're going to notice is your sheet might look a little bit different than mine, as I've made a few small changes to allow us to go through the various elements that we're covering in today's webinar. Now, as we discussed, the most common way that you're going to collaborate is simply by sharing your sheet. And when you share, you're sharing the entire sheet, and that's why it's really important to select the appropriate permissions. I can choose the appropriate permission and then type in any email address, and that's really all that's needed to invite someone to collaborate on your sheet with you. If your collaborator is not yet a Smartsheet user, that's not a problem at all. We'll just prompt them to create a login, and then anytime that they access Smartsheet, they'll still be able to access your sheet until you come in here and actually remove those permissions. And you can do that really easily by hovering over that X or even just using the drop-down to change the permissions that they have. You can share your Smartsheet items individually, which is what I just showed you how to do, or you can share them in bulk using a workspace. So if we head back to our left panel and select the Home option, anything that you create from scratch or create using a template is going to be saved in your Sheets folder. If you'd like to share in bulk, meaning you don't want to share items one at a time, and this is especially helpful if you're working with the same people over and over again, that's where you can start by creating a workspace. I've already created one for our webinar today, and I've actually dragged the items that are in our template set into this workspace. What this does for me is now when I invite my team to collaborate by selecting Share in the top right, it's going to look very similar, but one difference that you're going to notice is the button says Share Workspace. And when I do this, June now has access to both the sheets and the dashboard in my workspace. The benefit of this, in addition to sharing in bulk, is also that when it's time to remove sharing, if someone maybe leaves the organization or leaves your team, it's as easy as selecting the X and removing that person. I don't have to do it for one item at a time. It also brings us back to that whole idea of Smartsheet as a single source of truth. My team is going to know that any of the work that we're doing to manage this event is going to be saved in this workspace. And when I start incorporating new sheets, reports, or dashboards, they know they're going to find it here, and they don't have to remember where these various items are saved. Now that we've looked at sharing individual items versus sharing a workspace, let's head back to our event registration sheet and start talking about forms. When I share my sheet, collaborators can access it and make updates at their own convenience. There are, of course, other collaborator needs in this process. So especially for something like event registration, I'm going to need a way to collect data. So I need to know who is registering for my event, and I want to make sure that I get specific information from those people, reducing a lot of back and forth as I'm making sure to understand my guest list. This is where a Smartsheet form comes in handy. The template set that we downloaded comes with a form, so we'll take a look at that in a moment, but I want to talk about why forms are going to be really helpful here. A form allows you to intake information from collaborators who don't have access to your sheet, might not be a Smartsheet user, or might not even know what Smartsheet is. Forms are also very customizable, so you can select the exact information that you need, make it required, and share with anyone on any device. For our use case today, we're going to be using a form to intake event registrations, but forms are going to be helpful anytime that you're managing requests. So if you need to create an internal request process, like maybe, for example, I run a webinar program and other departments across our organization need to request a webinar topic from me. I want to get this on my roadmap, but I don't want to have a lot of email volume to sort through. I have a form, And that allows my coworkers to request a webinar, provide all of the information I need up front, and I continue to work on that in Smartsheet. It's also a great way to gather survey responses, and you're going to actually see one in action after our webinar today. And really, anytime that you'd like to collect information, such as customer support cases, order forms, all of that can be done with a Smartsheet form. In your sheet, you're going to locate forms at the very top, and you'll see there's a link to a help video that you can watch. It's just a couple minutes long to review the elements that we're going to look at today. When you're creating a form from scratch, Smartsheet views every column in your sheet as a separate form question. So while there's already a form created for us, we'll come back to that. I just want to show you that when you click Create Form, Smartsheet creates a form automatically for you, and you really don't have to do any work. So just by clicking Save, I now have a form that's ready to go. There are going to be changes that you might want to make to the form, so this is where you can customize it further, changing the name of your form, renaming some of these questions, maybe making the name a little bit friendlier and providing guidance with descriptions, and of course, removing questions, making questions required or even hidden or with a default field. The template set that we're using today did already come with a form, so we can just select Preview to see what's been created for us. This does look a little bit friendlier than what I started out with, so there's been some changes made already, and we can continue to customize this by selecting Edit. Here, you'll notice that I've selected radio buttons instead of a drop-down list. I can update the name of my form, and I can add a description to provide additional information about the event that we're registering for. Some additional permissions that you're going to find really helpful with a form is deciding what the next step should be. So once someone completes a form, do you want them to have the form up again, or do you need to redirect them to a different URL? And who can complete your form? Can anyone complete it, which is a really great way to make it wide open, especially when you don't know your audience? Or do you want to ensure that it's someone who already is a registered Smartsheet user? Once you've created your form, you can simply share this URL, and it is accessible just like any website URL. So you'll see I'll be distributing my form for my webinar survey after our webinar today. You can email this to others, add it to a wiki or a Smartsheet dashboard. And if you're using forms for a process that is for your business, for example, you can even embed this form into your website. And we do have Smartsheet customers that use these forms embedded into their website to intake customer service requests, orders, and a lot of other use cases. Once I've distributed my form out, anyone who completes it is going to add a new row to my sheet. Now, for a lot of processes, you're going to have a lot of volume, so you may have rows being submitted through a form constantly. In other scenarios, it might be a process where you don't see a lot of volume, and you don't want to have to come back to your sheet every day or multiple times a day to see whether there is new information. This is where we can start including some automation in our form so Smartsheet can notify us of important actions or of new registrations automatically. There are multiple ways that you can set up automation. So you can tell Smartsheet if a specific action happens in my sheet, notify myself or notify specific people. You can remind based on dates that are in your sheet or on a recurring schedule. And you can even request information. So if you want someone to update a row, sending an update request, or if you need to set up an approval workflow, all of that can be done with automation. There are also going to be row actions. So while this isn't a method of collaboration, you can use automation to lock or unlock rows based on specific changes in your sheet. And anytime that you're locking, that prevents anyone who isn't a sheet owner or admin from making changes. In our event registration sheet, I want to create a rule asking Smartsheet to notify me anytime that we receive a new registration. To do this, I'll head up to my automation menu, and here I can select the type of automation, and these will match up to some of the ones I just mentioned for you. What I'm going to do is select Alert Someone, which acts as sort of an FYI. Anytime that you're setting an automation, you are indicating a trigger. So what is this important action? And for us, it's going to be any time that rows are added. Then we want to send the alert, and this is already completed for me, and this is our action. So when a new row is added, what should happen? We should alert me in this case. And I'll go ahead and customize my message, which is the subject of the email notification that I'll receive. And I'll title my workflow. Once I save this automation, I can take a step back. I don't have to visit this sheet proactively, and I know that Smartsheet will notify me anytime that I receive a new registration. I can send these automations to others as well, and we'll take a look at how to do that in a moment. I do want to mention, while we're talking about automations and notifications, you're going to typically receive these by email as well as in the notification center up here at the top of Smartsheet. You can also indicate how you want to be notified. So if you have our mobile app, for example, you can receive mobile push notifications, or you can receive these in integrations as well, like Slack or Google Hangouts chat. To indicate these options, select your personal settings and click notifications over here on the left panel, and you'll see this gives you a lot more granular control about how to receive these automations. I personally have all of mine sent to my Google Hangouts chat. That's where I spend most of my time, and this reduces a lot of the email volume that I see, helps me really stay focused in a single location. In addition to tracking these registrations in Smartsheet, my team's also going to use Smartsheet to actually plan our event. We're going to do this in the other sheet that came with our template set called Event Plan with Hard Deadline. My team can be invited to come collaborate in this sheet anytime, but I also want to make sure that they are aware of any work that they have assigned. And this brings us to our second automation, reminders. Reminders are an alert, but it's not based on an action in a sheet, it's based on a date. And it's going to be powered by having date columns in your sheet. One important element here is that anytime that you double click on your date columns, you want to ensure that you've indicated to Smartsheet that this is a date column. You're not leaving it as a text column, which is our default. Anytime that you're tracking assignments of work, you've indicated that your column is a contact list column, and this will become really helpful as we set up our reminder. So we'll head back to our automation menu, select Create a Workflow, and here we can start working with our triggers and actions just like we did with our first automation. This time, I'm not going to indicate an action. I'm actually going to power this by a date. And instead of using a static date, I'm going to select the end date column that's in my sheet. And I want to tell Smartsheet anytime that a task is due, 3 days before that task, let's go ahead and remind the person that's responsible for it. And I want to send this first thing in the morning, so let's go ahead and select 6 a.m. It's bright and early. For our action, I can select an alert, which is going to remind someone that they have work to do. Another option that I have here is to actually send an update request instead. This allows me to tell Smartsheet 3 days before every due date, send the row to the person that's assigned to it and ask them to update their task so we can make sure we have the most accurate status as well as percent complete. I'm also going to send this not to a specific person or email address, but I'm going to power this by that assigned to contact list column that we just looked at in our sheet. And then we'll customize our message. And before I click save, this is where I want to actually complete the middle step of our automation, which is a condition, and a condition acts like a filter. I can use the condition to make sure that these reminder update requests are not sent for any tasks that are already completed. So what I'm going to do here is filter out anything that has a status of completed. This way, as we review these 3 different steps of automation, I've told Smartsheet 3 days before a task is due, for any tasks that are not complete, send an update request to the person that's assigned to that task. Now all I need to do is name my automation and we can go ahead and save. There are also other automations, as I mentioned earlier, like requesting approvals, locking or unlocking rows, or copying or moving rows to other sheets. These all follow the same structure that we just looked at: trigger, condition, and action, and can even be tied together. For a deeper dive into any of these other automations, I've included links in our webinar resources on the right side of your screen. And for anyone who's reviewing this video in the Smartsheet Learning Center, you can just go up to the top of our page and search for the type of automation you'd like to learn more about. So far, we've looked at how to use Smartsheet to gather event registrations and to plan our event. For both of these use cases, we've worked primarily in the sheet columns and rows, making updates to cells and talking about how to collaborate within our sheet. We haven't looked to the left or the right side of our sheet to include additional capabilities that are available focused on content and communication. Smartsheet allows us to collaborate by updating cells, but also functions as a source of truth for all the work my team is responsible for. We're going to take a look at how to utilize the comments column, the attachments column, and content proofing. To start with the leftmost column, you're able to attach files, whether it's image files, URLs, contracts, which are a large part of planning an event, directly to the row related to the task. For example, as I'm choosing my venue, I might want to attach websites to the different venues we're reviewing, contracts that we're working on, and I can do all of that by selecting this button here. This allows me to upload files directly from my computer, files that might be in cloud storage like Google Drive, OneDrive, and others, or links to any other URLs. I can also have conversations with my colleagues using the conversations column. I'll mention June, write a comment for her, and as soon as I send that, she'll receive a notification in the various methods that we talked about earlier. So in the notification center and anything else that she has enabled, like Smartsheet Mobile, email, or other integrations. In addition to attaching files and having these conversations in Smartsheet, making sure that all of the work that's included in planning this event is happening in our sheet, we can also start using Smartsheet content proofing to actually review content, adding comments, making annotations, and tracking different versions of the content that we're working on. Now, for those of you who are looking at your own sheet and you may not see our proofing column, this is a capability that a Smartsheet sheet owner or admin needs to enable for you. And they can do that by heading over to our right panel and selecting the proofing button where my mouse is currently hovering. Once they've enabled this for you, this new column gets added into your sheet. To start a proofing request, I'm going to go to my logo task and attach a logo for us to review as we're planning our event. Here I'm going to use a logo for Smartsheet's annual user conference, Engage. Once I've attached this to the proofing section, I can request feedback from my colleagues. And the reason this is really powerful is you can request feedback from users who don't have access to your sheet or who might not be Smartsheet users. They will receive an email, and if they're not a Smartsheet user, the link that they're going to use will actually be outside of your sheet. So you don't have to worry about sharing your entire sheet if you just need them to take a look at a single proof. These stakeholders can then review, actually pin comments, and ultimately approve the proof. As we make updates and add new versions, Smartsheet will retain our version history up here in the top right and allow us to retain all of these conversations and comments as we go through our content proofing. Now that we've seen all of these various collaboration methods in action, let's take a moment to review everything we've talked about over the course of this webinar, and then I'll suggest some next steps and review a couple of the most common questions that we've seen today. To start at the very top, you're going to be sharing your sheets, reports, and dashboards directly with others, providing them with real-time access as the most common method of collaboration. The other methods that we looked at allow you to be much more granular with how you collaborate. So if you need to intake information, whether it's an event registration or survey or one of many other use cases, you can create a Smartsheet form and distribute the URL. To keep others informed, you can set up automation, sending them alerts, sending reminders, or requesting updates, and all of the automation can be done with users who don't have access to your sheet. Lastly, you can incorporate content directly into the sheet you're already working with. This allows you to attach relevant files and documents to the specific work that you're doing, have conversations in Smartsheet that you would otherwise have probably lost in your inbox or in your chats with your coworkers, and review, proof, comment, approve, and track version history for content that you're working on. This is going to cover most of your collaboration needs, but there are, of course, additional questions that we get about integrations, reporting, as well as being more specific about what you want to share out of your sheet. If these are questions that you have, some possible next steps for you are on our screen here as well. I mentioned this earlier, but Smartsheet has a lot of integrations that are going to help you sync data and help you receive and collaborate on information where you work already. So this means you can set up automations to Slack, Facebook Workplace, Google Hangouts, Microsoft Teams, and more. And you can find more information about each of these items in the Smartsheet Learning Center, as well as linked to the right side of our page for anyone that's joined us live. To report on the information that you have in your sheets, represent it visually, or to bring together information from multiple sources into a single location to track KPIs or report critical data up to stakeholders or leadership, you can create a dashboard. Dashboards are a great way for you to control exactly what you're sharing without needing to share the underlying data, visualize it with charts and graphs, and include resources, embed video, and other web content. Dashboards, of course, are a whole topic of their own, and we actually hosted a 2-part dashboards webinar series in December that you can still access at smartsheet.com/webinars, listed on the right side of the page. Lastly, a question that we'll always see in a collaboration webinar is, how do I share just part of my sheet? And we do have a premium app called Dynamic View that empowers you to do that. Dynamic View provides custom views, allowing you to share just part of your sheet, and it's dynamic enough that this can actually change for collaborators depending on the phase of your work, specific milestones, and specific dates. To learn more about Dynamic View, I have included a link in our resources. If you'd like to talk to one of our sales reps, please feel free to type that into our Q&A panel. Before we dive into reviewing Q&A, I want to reiterate some of the resources that we've talked about today. So any of the topics that I've mentioned, you can learn more about and see in action, as well as find detailed step-by-step instructions by visiting the Smartsheet Learning Center at smartsheet.com/learning. To sign up for upcoming webinars, head over to smartsheet.com/webinars. We do have 2 rotating topics every month, so if you'd like to be notified, you can join our mailing list by selecting the button to do so here in our webinar. If you're looking for an onboarding webinar or if you have colleagues that could use one, we do run a weekly Smart Start webinar, which is an hour-long introduction to using Smartsheet. Lastly, if you're looking for a deeper dive, some hands-on activity-based training, or even in-person training, head over to smartsheet.com/training to learn more about working with our great training team. We do have time for a couple questions that I've chosen out of our list today. And as I mentioned at the start of our webinar, we do have a larger audience. So while some of you may not receive a response during our session today, we will absolutely follow up with an answer for you before the end of the week. We'll start with, can I collaborate with users outside of my company? Yes, you can collaborate with anyone who has an email address. And if you're creating forms or if you're setting up automations, these users don't have to be part of your company and they don't have to have a Smartsheet license or even know what Smartsheet is. One note that I'll add is that enterprise accounts and higher can set up a sharing whitelist. So if you ever see a message about not being able to share with someone, reach out to your admin to understand those settings. Another question that we saw is, how can I set up automation for other people? Smartsheet is only letting me set up an automation for myself. This will happen if you don't have the appropriate permissions on a sheet. So automation can be set up for yourself if you'd like to receive reminders or notifications, but to set up something that's sheet-wide and involves other users, you're going to need to be a licensed sheet admin or owner. What is the difference between a workspace and a folder? As we looked at today, you can share individual items or you can put items in a workspace and share that workspace with someone. In between, we have a folder. So in your workspace, to aid with additional organization, you can create folders, and folders cannot be shared. They're simply a method of organizing your work. Can I proof videos? Great question. Not currently, but that is on our roadmap and in development. And then one last question that we'll cover about proofing here, which is who can set up a proof? So we talked about how a proof can be reviewed and completed by anyone. So you can have a collaborator pin comments and approve. To enable proofing on a sheet, you will need to be a licensed sheet admin or owner. And to add a proof, you will need to have a Smartsheet license and can be an owner, admin, or editor. Thank you as always, everyone, for joining us. I hope to see you again for our March webinars.